welcome to the Bamboo Chalupa Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Brett Snyder. I am the owner of Knuckle Puck Marketing, and I am joined by my co-host Nate Shiver, the author of shiverweb.com.
Yes, hello.
All right, so today we're talking about a topic that is very popular, especially when it comes to the management from a business perspective of your SEO and your marketing campaigns. And that's this idea of generating buy-in for SEO. We're going to be talking about buy-in through, we're talking about buy-in really to just be, how do you get your key stakeholders to understand the value of these campaigns? So if you're in-house, this may mean, how do you get more resources? If you're an agency, how do you get more budget from your clients? If you're a do-it-yourselfer, how do you get more time? Like, how are you able to justify the investment of your time and your resources into this idea of pursuing SEO? And what we want to talk about today is how you can actually go about and get your key stakeholders on board with the value of SEO and what it can do for your business goals.
Yeah, and people understand that search engine optimization especially is valuable, but it's hard to frame as an investment. They hear about it all the time. Even big brands like Enterprise Rent-A-Car will mention it in their TV commercials. They know that search engines are where people go to find the information. But everything else is a giant unknown. And, it's a black box. It's a magic potion. And if you really want to generate true buy-in to get your clients, your team, whoever it is on your side, you have to be able to communicate how your strategies are actually expected to work. And, everyone knows that if they want more traffic conversions, but they often don't understand what it takes to actually get there. And generating buy-in is all about illuminating the path that you're going to take with street signs, that you're going to demonstrate what you need to actually get there. And it's going to vary according to, how you set up your goals.
And so I want to give you a little analogy. And so say I wanted to run a mile. Just go out there and say, today I want to run a mile. I probably don't need to do all that much more than, lace up a pair of sneakers, maybe stretch my hamstrings, maybe kind of warm up just a little bit. But that's really it. If all I want to do is just complete running a mile. Now, if I wanted to run that mile in, say, 6 minutes, I'm going to need to build up my endurance. I have to figure out how to pace myself. Am I one of those people that wants to jog the first half and sprint the second half? Or do I want an even pace for each quarter mile? And then if I want to enter a race, so say there's a mile race and I want to enter that race and I want to win, not only do I have to understand who I'm going up against and what type of training they've done, but I also have to understand where am I relative to those competitors and how do I reevaluate my personal training program in light of this information. And if you think about it, this is really a lot like SEO. If your goal is just, hey, I want to get some extra traffic from search engines, then you can follow your basic best practices. We've talked about some of them on the show here, and a lot of them are more familiar. You add your content to your website, make sure that site is crawlable, maybe get some links that point back to your content, and the traffic will come. But really, there's no telling how strong it will be, how focused it will be. And so you just completed the mile. All you did there is complete the mile. You got the site to a place where search engines may return that for search queries. But let's say I want my website to drive, say, 1,000 visits a month. I have to determine what I can do given my existing time and resources to either optimize a few key pages. Maybe I want to create a lot of, long tail resource content to go after some of that low hanging fruit. If my goal is 1,000 visits a month, or I have a set and established goal, I can tailor my strategies around making sure that I leverage my existing assets in support of that goal. But what we really want, what all SEOs, what all marketers, what all businessmen and women want is to win the race. We want that number one ranking. We want that, all those potential buyers to come and purchase from us and not our competitors. We want the revenue. We want the leads. And to do that, we not only have to understand what we need to do to curate our site or, build up our own training program, we also have to understand who we're competing against. What are these other marketers doing? What are they doing as far as their training is concerned? Who are they? And how do we build our strategy in light of understanding where the path is going to take us and what we need to do to get in front of the rest of the people that are realistically attempting to pursue that same path?
Yeah, and this whole analogy that I really like, Brett, it goes back to the idea of an investment. That you have to understand the goals of your investment in order to determine how you're going to generate a return off that investment. SEO is not a cost. It's not a cost of doing business. It's something that you are putting resources to with the expectation of getting a return back. And you have to have a sense of how much time, resources, budget you're willing to dedicate to SEO, and then create a plan that's going to allocate, that investment according to the needs or the race that you want to run.
And so what we're going to talk about for, the majority of the rest of the show is we're going to give you guys some issues that we know that Nate and I have run into when it comes to generating buy-in, both agency, in-house, and independently, and try to give you some very tactical ways to approach that so that you can say, all right, now I feel stronger going out there and fighting for the resources that I need to go out there and win that race. And the first one kind of comes with this idea of an investment that Nate talked about just a moment ago. Making informed investments implies that you have a basic set of expectations leading up to that decision. You have to be able to sell the value of your strategy to justify the time, the money, the resources that you need to be, to effectively execute that. So essentially, the issue here is projection. How do we project results based on a very imperfect system?
Yeah, and so as with any investment, again, you expect to receive a return that is disproportional to the investment that you put in. And that's what you have to prove. And the first step to generating buy-in is to clearly communicate how that investment is going to help accomplish business goals. Speak directly to your objectives, whether that's, more revenue, more leads, or more page views if you're a publisher. And just like our athlete who's running in the mile race, recognize what you're up against. Is there a lot of money? Is there a lot of big brands? Are there government sites competing for the same type placement? And be realistic about what it's going to take to compete for, the number 1 ranking, the number 5 ranking that's going to get the traffic from, the volume projections that we can kind of give.
And most importantly, to accomplish this, we need to get away from this idea of a linear model for projecting ROI in SEO. When we talk about a linear model, it's really very simply, if I do X, I will always get Y. It's that mentality of cause and effect that has a very direct relationship, which frankly doesn't quite work with SEO, just given the volatile nature, the constantly evolving nature of this discipline. And this linear approach to SEO doesn't work. So, by natural extension of that, it stands to reason that this linear approach to projecting ROI really doesn't fit. So instead, we want to focus more on building what Nate and I will refer to as your flywheel.
Yeah, and I love flywheels, especially if you've ever seen one in action in like a science museum. So a flywheel it's a spinning device that stores energy in the gears, and it's a device. It takes a lot of torque. It takes a lot of work to get it going, but once it gets going, since it stores its own energy, it stays going for a very, very long time. It basically runs off its own momentum. And so once you get it going, applying just a little bit of additional energy can keep that momentum going for a very, very long time. And the point is at the very beginning, you have to demonstrate how you're going to get that initial momentum so that you can show what the huge potential upside is. And, there's going to be tools like Keyword Planner and Google Trends that can help you understand what users are searching in search engines and when they do so and what the volume is like. There's things like analytics on your own site to understand seasonal swings and how people engage with similar content. And then, there's all kind of other tools to look and see what your competitors are doing, whether it's Open Site Explorer or Ahrefs. And, to get a sense of both the competitive landscape and also what the potential upside is.
And just to add to that, going with this flywheel approach, SEO is also a strategy that requires a lot of initial investment to keep it going. Just to kind of really hammer home Nate's point here, where an SEO campaign is designed to be sustainable, but it's not something where you're going to be able to say, hey, I'm going to invest $10 every week and I will get back $12 every, at the start of every next week. SEO is something where your investment needs to be looked at a lot more holistically. You need to understand that there are going to be short and long-term goals here. And really remember, and we can't stress this enough, when it comes to the search results, we know what wins. So we talked before about understanding what you're up against, understanding what type of mountain you're going to have to climb. This idea of a flywheel model for projecting ROI really recognizes that regardless of how high that mountain is, you are always going to have to do more at the very beginning to generate that momentum. So you want to put yourself in a position to be successful. You want to be able to recognize the fact that if I'm going to generate buy-in for an SEO campaign, I need to understand that it is going to take increased resources in the first 4 to 6 weeks to be able to create that initial momentum. But from there, that momentum will start to build on itself and start to be a lot more valuable for us in terms of enhancing and augmenting that strategy, as opposed to consistently having to invest the exact same amount of time, resources, money, energy, what have you, into the SEO campaign to be able to generate a positive ROI. And so when we talk about this idea of projections, there are some specific strategies for projecting ROI in SEO. If you're talking about the on-page content, talk to your customer service representatives. Find out how much time they spend answering the same basic questions. If you could say that our customer service on average every week spends 2 hours answering the exact same question, how long would it take to be able to effectively communicate the answer to that question using your website and then give the customer service representatives the URL or the link that they can send people on the phone? How much time will that save? No, it is not exactly your department. No, it is not necessarily somebody who is going to come back in and say, hey, well, I've already bought from you, so I'm not the target customer anymore. What this is looking at is this is looking at SEO as one piece of your overall business initiative. And if we want to talk about things like off-page assets, we can do some pre-qualification. Reach out to the potential link partners or key influencers. Engage their interest in an asset before you create it. Identify who the strong influencers are on social media. Use tools like Topsy or Follower Wonk to figure out who are the key players in your space, and then try to connect with them before you invest any time in building the asset, so you know what that audience is actually interested in receiving, and so that you can cater not only your investment in the resources, but also the final asset itself. And the biggest thing to remember here about an investment versus a cost is that you're not paying for your traffic like you would with PPC. We touched upon this at the beginning of this section when we looked at this as a more sustainable approach, but you're investing in the growth of your website that will continue to pay dividends beyond the time it took to produce that strategy. These investments are for sustainable results. And that's very, very important to remember here, because that is going to be how you effectively frame an SEO campaign when trying to generate buy-in from your key stakeholders. And one of the easiest ways that I have found over the course of talking to people through years and years of doing this is I kind of frame it through the idea of, how does Google work? Google is not looking for ranking factors. They're looking for quality signals. So when we're talking about projecting ROI, we're not looking to say, hey, for $500, you can get 2,000 visits. You're saying for $500, I am able to build an asset that will engage with these key influencers in the space who have already responded and told me that they would share that with their network. I am being able to produce some content on my website that effectively gives our customer service team back 8 hours a month. And if we're paying, those folks $100 an hour, 8 hours a month, I can look at that and say, hey, we're getting $800 a year. And that shakes out to be, almost $10,000 a year in terms of what we're going to be able to do. So you can look at the numbers the way that you want to, but really you have to understand that you're building something sustainable and you're looking for the quality signals. You're looking for these pieces as a part of the whole, and not looking just for this linear model of, I give you this, you get me that, because that sets bad expectations. It sets a bad foundation, and it doesn't put you in a position to be successful.
All right. Well, Brett, I have to say that actually segues really well into our next objection. So anytime you're looking at something that is a piece that is part of a whole, or, a key element of, the overall business, but not something you could segment out, a big objection that you're going to deal with is attribution. Like if the business is growing and SEO is a part of that, well, how do we attribute the growth to SEO? Because as we know that over the past couple of years, Google has been removing keyword data. And so you see the not provided. We don't get to see how much of our SEO traffic is branded. We don't get to see how much of it is, people typing in generic products or services. And as Aaron said in our last episode, if SEO is like trying to reverse engineer Google, attribution is like trying to reverse engineer the world. And this is always going to be difficult and likely imperfect, but I'll go and say that I think we found some ways to do it successfully and to try to overcome, basically getting credit for SEO to generate buy-in.
Right. And the very first thing that we have to do, and we're going to kind of just pull the Band-Aid off here on this one, but we have to stop complaining about things that we can't change. Keyword referring data is gone. It sucks. I hate it. Nate hates it. Most people hate it, not just SEOs, but anybody who's in marketing, because it gave us great information about what keywords resonate with our audience. But it's gone. It's gone and it's not coming back. And honestly, you're not the only person to lose your keyword data. We all did. This means your competitors. This means other marketing agencies or consultants that want to vulture your business. This also means your boss or your key stakeholders. The playing field is exactly as level as it was before. It's just framed a little bit differently. So let's not dwell on what isn't there and focus on what is. And when we talk about focusing on what is, and this is a consistent theme that any of our loyal listeners will recognize here, but we have to determine what metrics affect our key performance indicators or our KPIs. We can still track rankings manually, but you shouldn't. I don't track rankings, as a report for my clients anymore because rankings don't necessarily impact your traffic. They're a means to an end. Being number one doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get 10 times the traffic as number two. It's simply a means to an end.
Yeah, and you can do other things. I mean, you can look at landing page performance. You can look at your category level pages, different subcategories. You can look at by source, and you can infer a lot of data from landing page performance. If all your organic traffic is coming into your homepage and you're getting no organic traffic to your category or product pages, you could probably infer that that's mostly going to be branded traffic, people who are already aware of your business, but and you're not getting in front of people who know they want your product, but they don't know your business, which is kind of the big goal of SEO. You can look at organic traffic as a percentage of total traffic. Are search engines valuable in connecting your business with your consumers, than they were before you started your SEO efforts? If a larger and larger portion of your traffic is coming through direct or through paid, and SEO really isn't pulling its weight, that's when you can start to question attributing credit to your SEO efforts. You can segment traffic based on location or device, and you can prioritize, efforts where you're outperforming or underperforming the average. And most importantly, attribution is more about why than what. I mean, you can name all statistics and pull analytics all day long. But when it comes down to it and trying to attribute credit, attribution should be done in words and not numbers and just sheer statistics.
Right. And what's really also, something that I learned, it took me a long time to actually learn this, but understand, and this is more for the people who are really in the weeds in SEO and like, well, I know this is valuable. Why don't other people see that? It's like, and I want to go back to when Nate talked about looking at, say, organic as a percentage of total traffic. Especially if people work in-house or you're working with clients in an agency perspective, a lot of your key stakeholders at the other end of the phone, we'll call it, they may understand that their web traffic is up or that it's down. But that may be it as far as the level of detail. They may not realize that, hey, you realize that 50% of your traffic is coming from referral sources that are simply because of your job postings. So when you're looking at the top level analytics and said, hey, we're up 50% year over year, but really all of that traffic, or even maybe more than half of that traffic, is coming in from job postings, That's not necessarily the goal that we want to be able to accomplish here. So being able to generate buy-in for SEO by really kind of framing the existing analytics and the existing opportunity to be able to say, this is where SEO is currently contributing. This is where I expect it to contribute if we are able to invest X, Y, and Z in accomplishing that. So we want to focus directly on our KPIs. We don't want to focus on these vanity metrics. And we talk about vanity metrics, they're really ones that don't mean anything. I would rather have somebody tell me that they could not find me. I checked for 3 terms and I couldn't find you anywhere. I would rather have them tell me that while I'm looking at my analytics saying I'm up 30% month over month than to have somebody tell me, hey, I Googled this one term and you show up, but my traffic and my revenue is down 15%. Focus on things that actually physically affect the bottom line of your business. Establish a baseline for how SEO contributes to that bottom line, and then compare apples to apples based on those metrics. You need to be able to create a scenario where you are speaking the same language as your shareholders in terms of how SEO is going to be able to contribute to those goals. And we want to focus on the available information and not try to extrapolate non-existent info. Nate did talk about inferring a lot of information, and I would caution you to at least make sure when you're trying to infer data to make sure that it's a very strong inference. To do things like, hey, we can infer that, we see that all of it's landing on, say, the careers page. There's a strong inference that those are coming in, if it's organic, that those are coming in from queries related to job postings. We can't guarantee that, but that's a strong inference. And that's what Nate's talking about. He's not talking about saying, hey, we landed on the homepage. I Googled this one term and we show up number 1. It's probably that. That may be a piece of it, but really focus on concrete metrics and focus on available information to be able to establish that baseline and tie that baseline back to the ultimate business goal.
As a quick aside, I can attest that anytime you get into not concrete metrics, it's very, very easy for that to come back the next month and bite you. So like Brett said, stick to concrete metrics, things that you can prove, because it does go both ways.
And so the last item that we really want to focus on, and the last what we'll call problem or roadblock to generating buy-in for SEO, is a lack of control. And this is probably, we saved this to the end because honestly, this is probably one of the most common excuses that you'll hear, and I don't mean that word to be entirely negative, but in a lot of ways, when people don't control all aspects of the project, then it's, oh, well, there's an excuse. Oh, well, this didn't work, but it was because of this reason, or it was because of this reason. I wrote a post probably about 1.5 years ago that got some pretty positive momentum on it. And it was called Why Successful People Fail. And this isn't based on, long academic studies or, case studies of 50 years in a particular industry. But it's looking at anecdotally about how a lot of these projects from my agency career and talking to colleagues in the field of why do successful campaigns or successful people fail? And it's not a failure of concept. The key theme here is that this is not a failure of concept, but it's a failure of execution. If you can't find a way to assume control over the entirety of your project, you are not going to be able to drive the results that you need. Period. End of story. And I want to repeat that one more time because I think it's super important to really, really kind of embrace here. If you can't find a way to assume control over your project, you will not be successful.
Yeah, and so the first solution to this is to demand control. And I mean, this is going to be really, really difficult, especially if you are working with a larger organization, working with a team that has multiple other teams. You're working with development company, working with user experience, working with whatever other teams are involved with the website. But if you're going to be held accountable for organic results, be honest with yourself and with your stakeholders about what you realistically need to accomplish that, and be upfront right at the beginning, because getting the buy-in is essential up front. It's not something that you can come back after everything has failed and try to get it. So start with demanding control as much as you can up front. And second, make sure you scope out the resources that you need to be successful from the beginning. Again, you don't want to wait for the project to fail due to, lack of development resources or, a time lag with the client on getting revisions. When you never asked for the developer, or you never gave a realistic project plan in the first place. Generating buy-in it's sales after the sale in a way. And in a nutshell, if you're trying to sell your stakeholders on the program, you anticipate what the resources you'll need at the very beginning. You're the expert. And if you can't anticipate exactly how much of the resource you need, that's something that you need to get in order before the project even starts. Develop a timeline so that everyone understands how and when they'll fit in, and keep everyone in the loop from the very, very, very beginning so they can be aware of how the project is moving along, what their role is in it, and report on your successes and your failures. I think that's a huge, huge problem with getting buy-in for SEOs, that it's easy to report on early successes, but then when there are small failures, but still failures that might be, leading indicators of something that could fail the entire campaign, that's something that needs to be owned and reported on up front so that you have transparent back and forth, and that you can maintain that buy-in and the trust that you already have.
The last thing that I would add to this, just to kind of close the loop on it, when we talk about demand control, we're not saying that you have to micromanage or you have to, say, oh, I'm going to do everything. It just simply means make sure that you know what you need to be successful and that you have control over acquiring those resources. When you demand control over development, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the one that sits down and codes the project. But it does mean that you have to be responsible for knowing what development resources are necessary, knowing how they need to be allocated, where do they fit in with the rest of the complementary resources that you have. One of the most common reasons why a lot of marketing campaigns don't work is that the marketing team and the actual production or deployment team age. So when we talk about demand control, maybe another way to put that is to be the point person. And make sure that when you're the point person, that you know who your team is, you know who's on the court with you, you know where the ball is and where you want the ball to go. So demanding control does not mean micromanage. It doesn't mean be overbearing, and it doesn't mean to disrespect your team or the individual, value add that each person brings to that team. It simply means recognize everything that you are going to need. As Nate said, anticipate the resources that you need to be successful, and make sure that you have a clear and concise plan for leveraging those resources in pursuit of the ultimate goal, which, as we talked about before, is not vanity metrics. It's not rankings. It is revenue. It is leads. And if you're a publisher that runs ads or makes money on page views, then yeah, it's traffic. But make sure that you know exactly what it is that your team is trying to accomplish, that you take responsibility for getting everybody on the same page in pursuit of those goals, and that you are able to communicate upfront what you need to be successful so that your strategy does not fail based on execution, that you're able to be successful through the concept, through the execution, and through the reporting of that strategy.
All right, so just a quick run through, wrap up. First, annotate everything in analytics. I think we mentioned that in every episode. Educate throughout the project why things matter. Communicate what's going to be truly significant, what's going to be actually needed, and how it's going to be attributed back. Always have a plan B, and involve everyone who's going to be involved in the project. Involve them as early and as often as possible.
Right. And Aaron even dropped the little tip last week. Even if you don't expect those people to reply, CC them. Keep them in the loop. Don't provide an excuse for somebody else not following through on their end. Make sure that you keep them in the loop and then follow up with them when you can. Now, a couple more to add to this. Identify your key performance indicators and frame everything from your sales pitch to your concept to your execution through the lens of those key performance indicators. Know what you're up against and what it's going to take to get there, and scope correctly. If you're bad at scoping resources, which is common feedback that we'll hear, it's like, oh, well, I'm just not very good at knowing what's necessary. then that's something to work on. And it's something that is going to be essential to your success in marketing in general, is understanding what you need to be successful. So again, that you are not one of those successful people that fails based on execution. And last but certainly not least, put yourself in a position to be successful. When you have a plan coming into it, when you can clearly communicate that plan and you can acquire the resources, whether that be money, whether that be additional time, whether that be human capital, what have you, put yourself in a position to be successful so that when you were able, actually given the keys to the car, all you go is you'd go stick them in the ignition and you go and you take off in pursuit of what you ultimately want and what's going to benefit your company.
All right. Well, you can find show notes, links to things we mentioned, and our contact information at bamboochalupa.com. And please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave a comment and rating while you're there. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. It gives us great feedback on what we're producing, and it also helps others discover the show. So for Brett Snyder, I'm Nate Shiver. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.